and welcome to Big Hill Books. My name is Beth. I'm the owner of this lovely establishment. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn it over very quickly to our wonderful guests and speakers. But in the meantime, I did bust out a few extra chairs, so don't feel like you have to sit. Help yourselves, find a piece of floor, grab something to drink or eat, and we will get this started. I think some of you at least already know Emma Nadler here and Jennifer Cramer-Miller. So I'm going to turn it over to them. And ladies, one tip I forgot to tell you, you got to hold it really close. So
Okay.
and the volume knob is right
Okay.
All right. Come on up.
All right. Thanks so much, Beth. We're so happy to be here. I think is this working or does this just seem moderately working?
I don't know.
Okay, great. How's this?
That's
Really loud?
No, that's better.
Okay. I don't need to like frighten it.
I have a very expressive face. Pay no attention. I don't play poker.
Yeah. Thanks everyone for being here. There's more seats if you feel like sitting or if you feel like standing, stand, whatever feels good. That's what you should do.
Hi everybody, I'm super excited to see all you guys. Oh my gosh, some great familiar faces and some new faces, and I love this bookstore. I think it has such good energy, so if you haven't been here before, I'm really glad that you're here to see how adorable it is. It's bright and cheerful, so we're gonna have a good hour. Emma and I were introduced actually by Nina Badson, and I was kind of stalking Emma on Facebook, and I said, Nina, do you know this person? Because I want to know her. And I called Emma, and we connected so much on our books. So we're excited to be here today together. And why don't we just do a quick introduction of ourselves? So some of you know and some of you don't, but my name is Jennifer Cramer-Miller, and I am an author, obviously. I've been in the custom home building business for many years. And then about 8 years ago, I started just doing some custom home consulting so I could do more authoring and writing. And then I'm very involved in nonprofit work with the National Kidney Foundation. I'm the Minnesota board chair of the National Kidney Foundation and a Donate Life ambassador. So super excited to have you all here, and thank you so much for coming.
And my name is Emma Nadler, and I'm really excited to be out of the house right now. This feels amazing. Felt like I might not make it. I had a caregiver cancel at the last minute, which is just kind of like, that's on brand. So, but I'm so grateful and happy to be in this moment. So, I am a psychotherapist, not practicing in this moment, and just here as a speaker, author of this book, The Unlikely Village of Eden, which is a memoir about when life does not go to plan, as evidenced in how my day is going.
So really we found that thematically, both of our books really cover like what happens when something goes terribly off script in your life, something that you never expected was going to happen. And when it does not go according to plan, then how do you manage that? How do you move forward and adapt to a life that's so far from what you ever thought it was going to be, and hopefully find some hope and move forward with joy? So we both chose some readings that we'll start with, and kind of starting off with maybe the part that's like, whoops, didn't expect this to happen. So Emma, do you want to start?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and I just wanted to say also I'm so glad that you reached out to me and that we get to do this. And I just think what we're here to do in this world is find the people who understand us and we can understand them, and just like go through life's muck and enjoy it and be here and just show up however we are. And so that's just one of the reasons I'm glad we met each other.
Yes. Oh, me too. Thank you. So you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna read. No. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about, because I don't know who's read this and who hasn't, and maybe you just showed up or maybe you just like found this bookstore. So I'm gonna give you a little summary of my book and then dive into the reading. So my daughter Eden was born with a rare genetic deletion, which means she's missing DNA, and my expectation, I thought she was born healthy, I have another child, I thought I'm gonna have these healthy children, and there's a saying that's, I think is it in both of our books? So we plan, God laughs. And we found this as a commonality between us. It's just like one of many tracks that we track together.
And in fact, when Nina read my book, she's like, oh, it's just we plan, God laughs.
Yeah, because it's so great to feel like we have control of our lives and that everything is up to us. And then I think for most of us, in some way, we get weathered by what we thought it was going to be, and then it goes another way. And so then there's this chance opportunity to recalibrate and to regroup and to rebuild and to feel some grief and sometimes devastation and hard stuff, and then also to find and try to find joy again. So that's what my book's about. It's also about the relationships in my life and how those changed and how we saved each other. That's what I think we're here to do. So so my daughter has a lot of different medical challenges and developmental delays, so that really is part of the trajectory of my book, is that grief, and then also I think more of a universal question, which is like, how do we hold on to ourselves when we go through something really big? Like, how do we find like who we are? So I'm gonna read something about going to Coachella. Because that feels right. You'd think I might start out with the diagnosis, but no, I'm gonna go straight to Coachella. So, so my husband's a musician, and he was on tour while my daughter was in and out of the hospital for several years. And so I got to visit him like any good enough caregiver at Coachella. So my daughter's home, she has a great team, she's well cared for, and I am now like at Party Central. The best part of Coachella was the music. The weather was painfully hot. On Saturday, the day I was at the festival, from mid-morning until around midnight, it was nearly 100 degrees. I wore a navy blue striped romper, which I got right before the trip. It was thin and light with a wide open back, and the shorts were very short. Still, walking around the grounds, I was wearing more fabric than most, at least compared to the other women. The uniform was, essentially, lacy negligees. There were various sexy iterations of that and the occasional bold outfit, like a clear plastic miniskirt. I was like, wow, okay, this is definitely not the Midwest. And go girl, whatever works, do it. A few hours before night fell, I exchanged smiles with a woman as we passed each other backstage. I took in her blonde hair and her friendly eyes. We had a brief, bright moment as we walked in opposite directions. I didn't know it was Lady Gaga until my husband Cedar said, whoa, Lady Gaga just totally smiled at you. Years later, when Chromatica first came out, I told Eden about that moment as we were strolling near the beach. The song Stupid Love came on our outdoor portable speaker. We tried not to leave home without it, and it reminded me of that Coachella moment. I gave Eden every detail, which wasn't that many. Despite the non-story story, Eden kept bringing it up afterward. She would scrunch up her face into a tight smile and then announce, Lady Gaga smiled at you. She did it. A few weeks after that, when we were listening to our family playlist, Eden brought it up again, shaking her body with delight. Lady Gaga smiled at Mommy. She did, live in concert. Live in concert was one of her favorite phrases. I tried to incorporate it into sentences as much as possible, just to watch her eyes shine like river stones. The Bon Iver show was gorgeous, mystical, and somehow unexpected. I had seen the band play many times over the years, too many to count, and yet each time felt like the very first. The song 715 Creeks sent me back to scenes from the hospital, watching Eden's oxygen levels rise and fall on the monitor. When Vernon sang, pleaded those haunting, harmonized lyrics, the words seared into me. Under a dark sky and a string of lights outside of his trailer one night, I approached Justin. Most people who knew him well called him Vern, but I didn't know him that well. "Hey, buddy," he greeted me. I wasn't sure if he called me buddy because he couldn't remember my name, but I suspected he knew it. The show was amazing. I felt a flush of fangirl energy, which I tried to brush off. I continued. Creeks reminds me of some of the most desperate moments I've had with Eden, my daughter, the one who has been in the hospital so much. He looked me straight in the eyes and replied, "I hope it helps." There was a pause. I didn't know if it helped, and I didn't know what to say. How could I explain anything about what it was like to listen to a song like that so many miles away from her? The ache that I lived with, that never went away, that sometimes I forgot about, but never more than a few hours at a time. How could I explain anything about what we've been through, what living with this kind of unresolved grief felt like, especially over good beer with this particularly charming person in the middle of the desert? How could I express what it was like to be a mother to a child who I thought I might lose at any moment? It's as beautiful as it can be, that song of yours, is all I could muster. Justin continued, "If there's anything that I can do for your family, anything, really, please let me know. I'm sure that it has been a lot for all of you." He was gracious, as always, but I couldn't find the words to share my own experience, not on that trip, and hardly at all during that time. There was a stiff loneliness in not being able to share what it was like, yet of course, ambiguous loss wasn't small talk and didn't fit into the rhythms of everyday conversation, let alone backstage banter. I didn't want to lead with searing pain. It wasn't exactly after-party material, yet the grief dripped off of me, and I had no words to explain myself.
Emma and I had talked about that actual section of her book before, about the fact that sometimes when something really difficult happens to you, it doesn't fit into casual conversation, and that it is really hard to express it. And I think maybe what we've both found in writing these books is that when you write something, you can just go so deep into the experience. And like my friend Beth is here, and she said, "I've known you my whole life, and I didn't know so much of what was in your book." And I think it's because how can I explain it unless I sit down and write it? So, but there is that sort of sense of like loneliness, like this is happening to me, and how will anyone ever understand this? But so what I'm gonna read, it's from chapter 3, the name of the chapter is Punch. And for those of you who don't know anything about me, when I was 22, I suddenly got a kidney damage diagnosis, completely out of the blue. So I was happy, healthy, living in Seattle, ready to launch my life, and then all of a sudden, boom, whoops, your kidneys are damaged. We don't know how. We need to do a biopsy and figure out the cause and the extent. So this chapter is kind of that moment like, oh my gosh, what is happening here? And like I said, it's called Punch. The next morning, so I'm going to the biopsy. That's where we are. The next morning, I sprawled face down on a stiff, rolling bed in a sterile hospital room. While I waited for the procedure to begin, the thin blanket that covered me was no match for the cold, circulating air. My muscles twitched. While my parents sat together in the nearby waiting room, a nurse by my side shot a magic elixir into my IV, and within seconds, the tense, frosty edges melted away. Dr. Brown stood next to me. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Floaty." A squirt, cold, slimy gel on my back. Dr. Brown explained he would place 5 tiny needles into one of my kidneys, guided by ultrasound. Afterward, we'd know more about why my kidneys leaked protein. "You will feel pressure and hear a loud click from the needle punch," Dr. Brown said. His description was accurate. The pushing sensation was painless, but the sound startled me. as if a cap gun fired into my back. We've done one, okay? Now we will do a couple more. Push, pressure, punch, click, rinse, breath. 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 I could not believe this was happening. I was fine less than 2 weeks ago. We've got some good samples, Dr. Brown said. Now we wait. I want you to stay on bed rest for 24 hours. An attendant wheeled me from the procedure room, deep in the bowels of the hospital, up to my room on the 4th floor. A nurse placed sandbags on my back to prevent bleeding. As instructed, I lounged as still as possible, but my insides fluttered. What the hell? Every story begins with a domino moment that starts a chain of events. My first domino had fallen. I had common goals for my life at the time, as 20-somethings do. I planned to launch into a public relations career after my performance as a star intern. In my professional dealings along the way, or in my robust Pacific Northwest social circle, perhaps I would meet a rom-com worthy guy. A soulmate? Sure. He'd be so rock solid, so handsome, so irreverent. Oh, the laughter and the deep connections. That I would regularly think, how can I be so lucky to have caught this guy? Though Nick and I had been dating for a few years, he wasn't the one I envisioned in this scenario. Mr. Perfect and I would live blissfully in a lovely and oh so happy home, where I'd whip together meals that would be today's version of Instagram food porn. And like a cherry on top, I'd pump out photogenic babies and display my perfect family on annual holiday cards. All the while, gracefully keeping it together as a how does she do it professional career woman. Nicely wrapped up and tied with a bow. Well, maybe that is the amped up and glossy version, but boiled to the essence, my peers and I expected to travel a path that led us into the epitome of adulthood. Career, love, family. Up until that point, happy was my default setting. I'd never really considered an alternate state. And now, plucked from the west coast and Puget Sound, I shivered in the frigid winter of Minnesota, in a hospital with Mom, Dad, Dr. Brown, and yet to be understood kidney damage. The end of my 22nd year spun off the path of grandiose expectations and careened right off a cliff.
That is so beautifully written, and I also am so visceral. Like I was like wincing on the medical. Like it was hard to hear. I just like what I think about when I am listening to that is like, wow, you're a boss.
Oh my gosh, thank you. That's so funny. When I recorded an audiobook, and when I was recording the audiobook, there was a producer, and she was like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Like, and I write a lot in the book about being very thirsty because I later went on to be on dialysis, and they suck out fluid from you and you get very thirsty. And so many people have said to me, I just want to drink so much water when I read your book. And Kristen said, I will never take for granted peeing again. So, there's some side benefits to the book that you're going to appreciate new things.
Yes, it'll keep you hydrated.
Yes.
So read it.
Yes. But yeah, so I think we've both had the experiences of like, wow, something is different than I expected. And how, that's thirsty.
Speak of the water.
So great.
Right, I do. Oh my gosh, it's hilarious.
Even Goose wants to get hydrated when the cat hears about your book.
That's right, it has a powerful effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what we were talking about, and I've really come to believe this, is that, so I'm the only one here who's had 4 kidney transplants. I'm gonna guess that's a pretty good bet. And I'm also gonna guess that Emma is probably the only one who has a daughter that was born without DNA. And we all have something, like, we relate so much from very different things that have happened in our life, but what I have found about writing this book, and I think we talked about this too, is that I love how when people read it, it just, you know, usually when you talk to people when you first meet them, they tell you their job and how many kids they have and where they live. And I feel like people like pull back the curtain and they'll tell me what they've really gone through.
Yes.
And don't you love that? Like, I just feel like we all have so much in common, even when the things are not really a commonality in a literal way. But it's just about being a human. And we all find that we go through stuff and we have to figure out how to muddle through.
Absolutely. And I kind of have a double whammy being a therapist because people do kind of want to tell me anyway. Like, even just if I'm at a party, they're like, I got a thing. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I can't give you my opinion right now, you know, like, happy to
I'm off
listen
duty.
as a friend. But yeah, I know, and I think there is a lot to be said for just, yeah, like feeling that common ground and that we don't have to go through the same thing to understand what it's like to have that life.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious, so you were talking about writing, and I love what you just said before you read, Jennifer, about, you know, you began to share how the writing impacted you, and I'm curious about how else has putting this book out in the world affected you?
Well, one thing that was a really big deal for me when I was writing it, I worked with some of you know Kate Hopper, a really, really wonderful book coach and editor. And she worked with me on the book, and one of the first things that she said, because I had written kind of a previous version that was just for family and friends, kind of a light swipe at kidney failure.
It's so light.
And Kate said, okay, you have to be so much uglier. And I'm like, what, really? And she's like, yeah, you had kidney failure at 22. That had to be so hard, and we need to know how hard. And so she really got me, and you know, my husband is also a psychologist. He said, Kate wasn't the first one that told you that. Like, I should get credit for that, because I told you that a lot of times. Like, well, I listened to the book coach, maybe. But Dirk was saying it just from a perspective of like humans relating to humans. Like, unless you can go into that deeper place, you know, if there's a rise in the story and things get better, you're only going to celebrate things getting better when you know how hard they were. And so that was one big thing I learned about writing this book, is that I was going to go deep into some places that I didn't really want to return to, but I did, and the world didn't crumble. It was okay. How about you? What did you find?
Well, I got that similar feedback from my literary agent, and she was like, these are like essays. These are like funny essays, and so do you want to do a collection of essays? And I was like, no, this feels like a memoir to me. Like, this feels like a story that has an arc, and I don't really want it to be essays. And she's like, well, if you don't want it to be essays, then you're really going to need to dig a lot deeper.
Yeah.
And put a lot more on the page and show us more of the really hard, gritty, because it was just lighter.
Yeah.
It was like easier to write and easier to read. And she said, so like, let's see what happens. Like, why don't you try that? And I did, and I mean, people say they cry, so like, I guess I've achieved my goal.
Yeah.
But no, I feel like then it's the real thing, right? Because I think we can put out a version of ourselves that feels easier to put out.
Right.
And it's just less difficult, it's less vulnerable. And
yeah, and when someone tells you to put out the ugly version of yourself, you're like, really?
right.
Do I want to?
Right, but then it's like, it's hard because it's true, but then it's also like, I mean, I think whenever I get to see other people's like real experiences or hear more or get more of that depth, then I don't see that ever as ugly. Like, I relate. So it's like, I think that the relatable comes when we're willing to really put it out there.
Yeah, I did write an essay then following up on that, and it was called The Ugly Route to a Beautiful Memoir. And so I do think you're right, like when you get into those, you know, ugly places, they're not that ugly, they're just human.
Right. Like, if you've ever seen someone cry, like, we'll sometimes judge ourselves like ugly cry, but I've never watched someone cry and think that's an ugly cry. I'm just like, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I feel for them. It's an honor to sit with them, whatever it is, but it's not ugly.
It would
It's
be a
never
terrible
awkward.
thing to say to them
Well,
if you
of course,
said,
of course.
your cry is pretty ugly.
Right, but people do that to themselves, right? There's
Right,
that like
absolutely.
designation of like ugly cry, and like that if you lose it, then it's
Absolutely.
somehow not fit
Yeah.
to be seen. And of course, there's a time and a place. Like I'm not introducing myself with this, like in terms of just like knowing people. But I think we can sometimes get to the point, or when we're writing, where you can really let it all out.
Right.
Yeah.
And I always find when I get to that place, I'm like typing or writing in a notebook, and if I start to cry, I'm like, okay, I hit the bone on that one.
Yes.
But one thing that you said too, like your first one was funnier, and I think that we both use humor in our books, which is also a nice counterbalance because life to me, I learned this through all of it. It's never all one thing. Like some of the worst moments, my mom was with me like every step of the way, and some of these horrible moments in the hospital, my mom and I laughed so hard. Like there was always just some odd, funny thing that could happen in the worst moment. And like I remember one time, we were just getting punchy with the whole thing. I was in the hospital and this kind of resident guy came in and he wanted to take the history, and I was so sick of the history. It's like the history and the history and the history. And so I started telling him the history. He was so young, he was like Doogie Howser, he looked like he was 16. And I looked at my mom, and we both have a bad habit of inappropriate laughter. So I looked at her and I was like, oh no, she's gonna do this to me. And she was like smirking, and I was like telling him, and so I got really puffy, and then this and that, and then they put me on prednisone, and I just tried not to look at her. But then I got to this point where I just burst into laughter when I told him. And then in 6 months, I had kidney failure, and I just started laughing really hard. And then my mom started laughing really hard. And then this poor guy, he started laughing and apologizing. And he's like, I'm sorry, it's not funny. It's really not funny, but you're laughing and your mom is laughing. And it was kind of a fun moment. And we told him, don't worry about it. It's okay to laugh. But so nothing is ever so evenly divided. And I think that's one of the best parts of life. Like, we can find joy even in the hardest places.
I want to go to appointments with you. That sounds really hilarious, and now I'm gonna bring this moment with me because you're so right about the history thing. It's like if I have to tell this history one more time, like I am done with the history.
So sick of the
Let's
history.
move forward, people. But
Yeah.
of course, for
It's
all
like we
the
should maybe
appointments.
just write it up and just hand it
That's
over.
actually a great idea.
Yeah,
You could just,
that's it. We've solved the
get the
problem
book.
here.
Get that book. Just a couple of things for you to read, Doctor. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we were gonna do, I think, one thing we wanted to do is show kind of the range of grief and life and read something a little bit lighter. What do you think?
Yes, and when we talked about that, reading something that was kind of a heavy moment and then reading something that was a lighter moment, and what I found is a lot of my things are all mixed together, but
Yes.
I did pick something has like a newfound perspective to it.
Awesome. Let's hear it.
Should I start with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
great.
So we're gonna go way up to chapter 69. I have really short chapters. You're welcome. It makes it really fun to read when you're like, I just want to get to the end of the chapter, and you're like, oh, I'm already there. Okay, so this chapter is called The Prize. This is 20-some years later. I think I've had 3 kidney transplants by this point. I've been on dialysis 3 times. But I'm married, and I have a daughter who I consider to be a miracle because I didn't even know that would have ever been possible. And my husband's here, and I really married a great guy, so I'm just going to say that in front of all these people so he knows he's a great husband. So in this chapter, I'm driving with my daughter just after school. And I don't know if I need to explain that much more than that. Oh, I'm going to talk about a wedding. It was my brother. He got married. The prize. After the wedding, when summer gave way to fall, I picked up 13-year-old Liza after school. We headed to the pharmacy, a frequent errand, which may have sparked her conversation. It's hard sometimes, she said, fidgeting with her backpack. What is? I felt my protective mom mode flare. Was there a bully at school? Was a teacher out of line? The kidney stuff. I mean, "Don't take this the wrong way," she said, avoiding eye contact. She looked straight ahead at the road. I pulled in a grounding breath. "It's okay, Liz. What are you thinking about?" I stole a glance at her and then turned back to face forward. "Well, I think you do a great job. I just hope it doesn't happen to me." Her hands rested on her legs and her eyes rested on her hands. "Oh my gosh, no," I exclaimed. "This will not happen to you. The doctors told me this condition is not genetic," I said firmly. "It's okay for me," I continued, "but it would never be okay for you." I wanted the conviction of my words to banish her thought forever. Relieved, she looked at me as though I'd wiped away her doubts. I think you have an amazing attitude, Mom. You handle everything really well." "Thanks, Liz. I try," I replied, turning briefly to take her in. My eyes on the road, I continued. "I guess through it all, I've become determined to make it the best I can." She nodded, and I felt connected to her in a way that filled me. Gratitude flooded me as I took in the bird's eye view of us, a mother and daughter running errands after school. There was so much more I wanted to say to her about how lucky we are and what a miracle it is to travel through this life together. I wanted to tell her that the challenges I've endured scooped a piece out of me, but the whole has filled with a fierce appreciation for being here, for her, for Dirk, for my parents and family and friends, for robust coffee and crisp sheets and ripe avocados and spring blooms and blue skies and inside jokes and the wonder of it all. Instead, I just rested my hand on hers and smiled. She continued, "All I know is I'm glad you're determined because it seems to be working. Keep doing what you're doing." I inhaled a thankful breath that Liza held a positive outlook about my health. Soon after, I remembered the mother and daughter I'd encountered long ago at a dialysis support group. I'd traveled a long way since I'd sat in that circle with my mom. I remembered the hollow expression on that woman's face and the invisible weight that pressed her daughter into her chair. Now Liza was a teenager, and I was in my 40s. I'd guessed that woman had been in her 40s back when I was in my 20s. I hadn't allowed myself to empathize with her then because I'd feared her fate was my future. If only I could time travel back to that moment as my current wiser self and offer understanding and support. I wanted to return to that room and hug her and her daughter. Through the years, my proclivity to make everything okay had garnered more depth. As life played on through my 20s, 30s, and 40s, I learned that we will always toggle between joy and sorrow, and life is a teacher that never retires. As Liza and I connected in the car, I fortified my determination to boost my mind-body wellness with positive imagery. Everything I could do to manifest the future I wanted for my family, I would do. We had to be okay. I had thought the stakes of this game came down to heal or fail, and healing was the prize. But no, maybe the real prize is living.
I feel like I needed this today.
Oh.
Yeah, really. And I think you're so right about how it's all intertwined and how connected all the pieces are, right? We can't extract grief from everyday life when you're
Right.
living with some grief. It's just a part of it, and therefore things aren't usually just happy or just sad or whatever. There's like such a complex emotional elixir.
And I think sometimes we try too hard to make things good and bad. Like every new year, every January, it's like, last year was a bad year and now we're gonna have a good year. And I just don't believe in good years and bad years. Even within a whole 24 hours, it's not all good and bad. It's just such this mix. I like to call it a mix of beauty and bummers, and let's just be grateful that we're here for all of it.
Yeah. I'm gonna read a party scene, and I'm all about the parties today. All we're gonna do is talk about parties, because that's where I want to be.
I love this scene. This is great.
Okay, awesome. So this is Eden's birthday, and it is I think it's her second birthday. Let's go with that unless you hear otherwise. We had invited about 50 people, including nearly anyone who had helped us along the way. Eden's former physical therapist and in-home special education teacher from Minneapolis, Jill, our caregiver Julie's sister-in-law and her family. My dear friend Kate brought her girls, and Deborah was joined by her whole crew. My friend Sarah brought not just her immediate family, but also her in-laws who were visiting from out of town. Even Mellie's parents, our former Minneapolis neighbors who had bolstered us with their reassuring presence, made it in time for the cake cutting. My neighbor Kitty came by too, sauntering over to wish Eden a happy birthday, gleaming. We featured a drink named after the birthday girl, a grapefruit sage tonic, the Eden. She now had a dance and a drink in her namesake, which wasn't bad for age 2. The kids had juice, but on the day my daughter officially transcended babyhood, I added a healthy glug of tequila to the grown-up version. Before my son Avi helped blow out the candles on the giant vanilla sheet cake, the light flickering off our faces, I stood next to my husband Cedar, who had turned toward me, holding Eden in his arms. I made an impromptu speech to the people who had helped us live through the past 2 years. Thank you for being here today and, well, a lot of days. You've helped us, well, make this as great as it could be. Immediately after I spoke, my face blushed, and I thought, that sounded awkward. Did I just announce this has been great? Relationships can be awkward, and so can I, especially when riffing in front of a large group. After we passed out slices of cake, I queued up the 37-song playlist Cedar and I had made for the occasion. Near the stairs, on the dark hardwood floor, a small dance circle formed, which, of course, included my mother, shimmying in mint green skinny jeans. I pulled Cedar in for Shotgun by Junior Walker and the All-Stars, and we rollicked together nearly as hard as we had on our wedding night. I kicked up my feet, he twisted low. Towards the end of the song, we twirled each other around. It was like old times, sort of. And it was still daylight, the sunlight spilling in the front windows. Eden pulled a sparkling rainbow balloon around from room to room, and the other kids lobbed the other ones back and forth like volleyballs. We offered each child their choice of balloon to take home as party favors, as if we'd planned it. Our gratitude to our caregivers, Mark and Julie, as usual, was boundless. My mother later told me that the party had made her proud, and not just because her daughter was gyrating in semi-public. She was proud because we were savoring the moment, because we were looking on the bright side, something I generally tried to do, but with mixed success. She was proud because we had taken a moment that could have been labeled a reason to grieve, and we had decided it was a reason to celebrate. The grief was not gone. How could it be? Grief, the ambiguous kind we knew, had sunk into our skin, plunged into our daily routine. It lived among our unlikely village, and it could not be siphoned out. But there was also more than mourning. I was starting to understand that we could do more than mourn. We could gather, and we could dance.
What's the name of that chapter?
The Eden.
Oh. You know, I think that both of us have, and we've talked about this idea that, like, we don't have books that have happy endings, like that there's a resolution to the original problem, that it's gonna go away. It's not gonna go away. But we can, I really liked, I don't know if we had this conversation or if I heard you say this on a podcast, but I think that you had said that kind of a turning moment for you was when a therapist said to you, you can have a good life. What did he say? You can make this a good life?
He said, I mean, I was like in a moment of exhaustion and sadness and crying, and he said, and I still think you can have a good life. And I think your daughter Eden can have a good life too. And that was the first time anyone had ever said that to me, insisting that I could still have a good life, that a good life is still possible. And that looks different than I thought it would, and it encompasses hard things, and it does not one or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the mix.
It's the mix.
And I remember you saying that was sort of a turning point for you, like,
Yeah.
oh wait, maybe I can, like, the fact that someone said that to me, no one had said that to me.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I realized I had a moment where I said that to myself. I just didn't want it to be otherwise. And so I just told myself, you have to make this a good life. And I think we can all do that. Like, I think we all have to try to do that. Not dismissing. We don't have the luxury of ever dismissing the problems that we have. It's just, like, that would be nice.
Yeah.
But that's not possible, but we can all savor the moments that are so lovely. And I think one thing in both of our books too is just the power of people helping people. I mean, the name of your book, The Unlikely Village, this village has sustained you and lifted you and helped you. And I have had, Dirk gave me his kidney indirectly 12 years ago. My mom gave me her kidney for my 3rd transplant. 2 registered donors, gave the kindness of checking a box. Like, none of us can get through anything without people. And so I think we both really know about the power of people helping people, and everyone in the room knows that. None of us does it alone.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's, I think at the core, like, that's like what I want to bring to any room, is like that insistence that we can do this together, and we can be part of asking for help, giving help, being interconnected, being part of a web of doing those things together. It's not one way, and absolutely, like, I mean, like any book, any life, any day, it does not happen alone.
Yeah. And when we focus on that, all the people, then it's so hard not to be chock full of gratitude. Because there's just, I mean, so many of you in this room, I'm so grateful for you, like, just having friends and people that know you and lift you up, and then you can know them and lift them up. That's really, I think, what it's about. Like, if all of us can do that, we can all have a meaningful life.
And I think that's a great place to pause. We're not going to name names of specific people in this room we're grateful for, although we could. But I think that's a really good place to maybe pause, and we could open it up for questions.
Yes. Do you guys have any questions for us? Fire away.
Yeah.
Or
comments.
Can you explain a little bit about what not having DNA means for your daughter's health?
Yeah. And she has DNA, but she's missing a chunk of the Q. It's the Q arm of the 12th chromosome for people who are like real deep into genetics. That's not me. But she is missing a certain portion of DNA, and so when we got her diagnosis, and still to this day, it's really unknown.
How did it show up?
Okay. It showed up because she was having feeding difficulties, and she was really having trouble eating, and she still doesn't eat by mouth. And so we got to the point where, I kept taking her back to the pediatrician, like, hey, something's not working here. And at first they were like, it's probably your fault. Like, let's see if the mother is doing something wrong. But it wasn't that, and not there's so many wonderful medical providers. I just happened to, at that time, kind of tap into some people who are more like, maybe it's something you're doing, which can happen too. It's all there. And so once we ruled that out, and we tried different things with her, then they ran a genetic screening. It's a blood test, and a lot of people have genetic deletions and have differences in genetic code, and we're just now learning more about that, because we didn't used to have the technology to understand and see. So, like, this has been happening as long as there's been DNA.
Right.
But we just are learning so much more now and can pinpoint things that we couldn't pinpoint in the past, and that's part of the reason it's so unknown. Yeah.
Well, I have a comment, it's not really a question, but I just wanted to comment that I love the understory, Jennifer, of your friendship with your mother. unique, and it makes you want to keep working through the struggle parts because she's just always there, and your friendship and how you can laugh together is just wonderful.
I've had so many people like email me, text me, whatever, and say, I really love your mom. Like strangers, book reviewers are like, I love your mom. Which I like, because I love her too. She's pretty cool.
Well, and you were able to get that across, you know? A lot of people wouldn't be just commented but not carried through where you start to feel about it.
Thank you.
And what the relationship brought out in the two of you. Like that's what I love as well, is that the humor part and the way that you could do that together is just like it made me want to do that even more.
Oh, that's nice. And when when I was able to get pregnant and I knew I was going to have a daughter, it was so exciting to me. I wanted to like replicate on the other end the relationship that I have with my mom, with my daughter, and I don't know. I remember reading a book. I think it was Dr. Brazelton or one of the baby books talked about you don't always like totally bond with each child in the same way. Sometimes there's a better goodness of fit. And I thought that was a funny expression. And I remember just thinking, oh, Liza and I have such a goodness of fit. And with my mom, I have a goodness of fit. So we're very lucky that the three of us now are great at inappropriate laughter together.
That's one of the essential skills of being alive, I think.
I just want to follow up on that for people who haven't read Emma's book. The relationship with your mom is so interesting and complex in that book. And people don't talk, I feel like, even on my podcast, I've heard you on other podcasts, it doesn't come up a lot, but it's a really important and interesting topic and interesting comparison. Not that that's bad, good, just different. And
we all have such, mother-daughter or mother-child relationships are so complicated and so varied. And so I think any time that we can get a glimpse into people's relationships with their moms, it's always interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point, Nina. And really, I hardly get any questions.
she's such a character.
Yes,
Yeah.
and people don't really talk more. And I was a little like when I put out the book, like, how's that gonna go? And would I get a lot of questions? And really, that hasn't been the case. So that's cool that you picked up on that.
There was a part,
Okay.
yeah, no, I should interrupt the Q&A. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say I'm really glad to be here. I see a therapist, and lately the word we've been using is brutal and beautiful. And right now that is so my life. It's kind of a hot mess, but yet being here and just listening to challenges that everybody goes through, it like empowers you in a weird way. So I just want to say thank you because it means a lot. It's a messy time, right?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for saying that, and really thank you for coming.
Yeah.
It's that mix of beauty and bummers, and beautiful is, I think Glennon Doyle, that was her terminology of the beautiful and the brutal, and it really applies. It's what most of us live through, so
Yeah.
I'm so glad you claimed
I
it.
kept thinking, we can do hard things when you were thinking.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have that in my office, yeah.
That was an interesting comment actually that you made, because you mentioned too how some of your friends didn't know until you wrote about a time that you all experienced, and I'm sure it would be the same with people that you in your life also. I haven't read your book yet, but was it difficult to write so vulnerably, knowing that maybe other people hadn't known? I mean, was there any sort of self-monitoring about? It would be really hard in my brain as a very private person to be so vulnerable, knowing that once you are, you do gain strength from it, but you don't know that
One
for a
thing
long time.
that makes me think of is when you're writing something and you're like in your office and everyone's asleep and you're just like writing, you kind of forget that people are actually going to read it. And then it comes to the point where you're like, oh wow, everyone's going to read this, or not everyone, but a lot of people are going to read this, and that's a whole different awareness. So, I don't know, did you do any self-monitoring on that?
Well, I did think about it, certainly before, and for a time I was worried about it before the book came out, and I really worked through it. Like, I just felt like, okay, like, this is part of it, of course. There's some fear of, like, launching this, and then when it came out, I felt this huge relief, and I'm so happy it's out there, and I've gotten so many people in my life, and other people, which is always really cool, but people in my own life saying that similar, like, they didn't know all of these pieces, and so it's been, like, very educational for the people that I love, that love me, to be like, oh, like, that's what you need. Because I don't necessarily, like, when you connect with your friends, you're there for them, they're there for you, but, like, I'm usually thinking about, like, how much space does this take up, right? Like, I don't need to tell them every single detail about, like, the syringes my daughter needs or whatever, right? Like, there's details that I'm not gonna probably get into, not because I'm hiding it or that I wouldn't share it with them, but just because there's so many things to talk about and connect over. And I do, for my own sake, at this point of grief, and again, my daughter's 8, so I'm not in acute grief like I was when I got her diagnosis, so it doesn't take up as much space. I'm trying to be mindful about, like, how much space in a conversation does this take up, for my sake. Just because I want to also experience other things. So that's a long way to say a lot of people did not know the full extent, and that felt like such a beautiful thing to get them in the loop and feel like more understood. And I think that's what writing can do in so many ways. I mean, no matter what's going on, is like, to me, it felt great to have that information out there. But I know for other people, maybe it's not the case.
Yeah, for me too, this just occurred to me, but for so long, when I was so young, I really was just hell-bent on not having kidney problems define me. And nobody knew. I mean, Elaine knows I was working with clients on their homes, and I was a busy custom home girl, and nobody knew, like, this backstory. And I didn't want anyone to know. And then I got to the place where I was like, well, it's not gonna define me because I've already done so many other things. And so I felt kind of liberated, like, oh, I can just, tell people what's been going on in the background, but it's not gonna, like, take away all the other things that people know about me. So I felt kind of liberated, like, now you get to see the whole thing. But also, if you think about, like, Beth, if I told you I had a biopsy and it was a really unpleasant experience, that's about what you would say. I wouldn't, like, be going, push, pressure, punch. Like, writing is a different thing than talking, so it's just different.
I was gonna say I could contribute because I'm the one that said that to her.
Yeah.
And we lived together, and I went to dialysis with Jenny, and, like, we, I remember you having to, monitor what you were drinking or eating and potassium and all that. But the thing is just the kind of person you are. You're so positive, and you're like, your book is all about how you weren't gonna make this define you and everything. So I experienced it in that way with you, and didn't know those deeper feelings of fear and whatever. So something that you said earlier when your book coach kind of said you have to go deeper, because people, need to see that ugly part in order to really get to that joy. I think that's kind of what you did in that book.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, that very human part. And I think that's relatable. Like, even if, and for most people don't have that same situation, I think there is those deeper feelings and themes are relatable.
Yeah.
And I would, anyone who wants to start writing, highly recommend. And I know there's a lot of writers in this room already, and I just think it's just such a chance to shape our own stories. I mean, that's the thing about it. It's like, I also use narrative therapy in my therapy practice, and it's really aligned with this, because what we say about what's happened in our lives, it carries so much power. It's not just what happened, but it's how do we recall and how do we formulate what has occurred, and how do we carry that with us and tell those stories. So we're always doing that, whether we think we're doing that or not. We're subconsciously doing that every day. We're creating stories. So when we get to actually consciously work them out, then we get to decide, like, how do I want to share this? How do I want to think about this? Like, what really happened and how can I have some sort of an influence on the way I'm thinking about that. So I think that part of it too can't be underestimated.
Yeah, I'm a big believer too in the stories that we tell ourselves and in writing, and not even, if you don't even want to be a writer, I really recommend writing just emotionally, and I like to think of it in two ways. One is have a damn it dump, so if you're having bad moments, just like go to your notebook that's reserved for the damn it dump and just like spill it all out, because it feels good to get it on paper. And then I also like to have the lucky list, and when we create a list of the things that we feel lucky for, just like I can still laugh and I can still have my relationship with friends, and you know, I might be on dialysis, but I still have all these things and have that lucky list. I think those are two really good exercises for writing for like mental sanity. How are we doing on time?
I think you're on it.
This
You
would
did it.
be a great
You
time
did it.
to end. Thank you again for showing up and being here and
Yeah.
for the questions and the energy that you brought. This is so great.
I just loved it. And Emma, I loved being here with you. I just love your book so much, and I love all our conversations, and now we've had one in public. So, and thank everybody for coming. It just means so much to us when you show up. It's really lovely, so thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you for your books.
We both have books here, and we can sign books if anyone's interested.
Yeah. Speaking of villages, right?
Right.
I thought about that.